It started, like most things that go wrong in your life, with something completely ordinary. A library book. I was living in Bellingham, Washington at the time, in a one-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of the previous tenant's curry and damp carpet. I'd moved there for a job that hadn't panned out, and now I was just there, drifting. Working a temp gig data entering for a shipping logistics company downtown. It was the kind of job where you'd look at the clock, see it was 2:13 p.m., and feel a genuine, soul-crushing weight at the thought of 3 more hours. My one bright spot was Chloe. Chloe worked in the cubicle kitty corner to mine. She had this long honey brown hair she'd always twist up into a messy bun with a pencil stuck through it, and when she'd lean over to grab a file from the lower drawer of her desk, her blouse would gap just enough to give you a glimpse of the delicate lace edge of her bra. I'd stare, my fingers frozen over the keyboard, my mouth going a little D or Y. It was pathetic, I know. But in that gray fluorescent-lit purgatory she was a shot of color. She had a laugh that was too loud for the office, a real, unself-conscious bark that made a few of the older ladies frown but that I lived for, and her eyes, a warm liquid brown, would crinkle at the corners when she smiled at me. I'd been working up the nerve to ask her out for 3 weeks. I'd crafted and discarded a dozen opening lines in my head. "Hey, some of us are going for a drink after work, wanna come?" Sounded too impersonal. "I was thinking of seeing that new thriller at the Pickford, maybe you'd," sounded too much like a date, and I was terrified of the rejection. The book was my excuse. It was a thick doorstop of a historical novel I'd checked out from the Bellingham Public Library on Prospect Street, thinking it would make me look smart and interesting if Chloe saw me reading it on my lunch break. I'd managed about 80 pages. The prose was dense, the characters were unlikable, and frankly, after 8 hours of staring at numbers, my brain was mushed. It was due back that day. "Late fees are the devil," I muttered to myself, pulling into the library's parking lot after work. The sky was the color of dirty dishwater, that particular Pacific Northwest gray that seems to seep into your bones. The library, a modern building of glass and brick, looked inviting, a beacon of warmth and quiet. I grabbed the book from the passenger seat and headed not for the main entrance, but for the after-hours return. It was a drive-up style slot, a metal mouth set into the wall near the loading dock. Next to it was an automated kiosk, a screen and a printer, for getting receipts. I always got a receipt. It was a habit, a tiny piece of paper that proved I'd done my civic duty, that I was a responsible adult. I slid the heavy book into the slot. It made a satisfying thump as it landed in the bin inside. The kiosk screen lit up. Processing, I shoved my hands in my pockets, watching the screen. The wind picked up, carrying the damp, salty smell of Bellingham Bay. I thought about Chloe. I'd seen her earlier, standing by the coffee machine, one hand on her hip. She was wearing these dark-washed jeans that hugged the gentle curve of her ass in a way that was almost artistic. I'd imagined, just for a second, what it would feel like to rest my hand there, the denim ruff under my palm. The kiosk beeped. A slip of paper began to print. I reached for it, tearing it off neatly. It wasn't a receipt. Well, it was, but not for the book I'd just returned. At the top, it read, Bellingham Public Library, due date slip. But below that, instead of the title of the historical novel, was a list. A long, dense column of text. I frowned, holding it up to the dim evening light. The print was small, crammed together. The Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan, abandoned at page 112. Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, abandoned at page 543. Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, abandoned at page 267. The Silmarillion by J.R. Tolkien, abandoned at page 87. A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, abandoned at page 54. The list went on, and on. Dozens of titles, hundreds. I scanned them, my heart starting a slow, heavy thud in my chest. I recognized some. Ulysses. I tried to read it in college, gave up after the first chapter. War and Peace. My grandfather gave me a copy. I think I made it 50 pages. The Brothers Karamazov. Moby Dick. Les Miserables. These were all books I had started and never finished. But there were others I didn't recognize. The Luminous Depths by an author I'd never heard of, A Calculus of Shadows. The Last Transmission of Captain Idris. Asterisk sci-fi, fantasy, non-fiction, literary fiction. The list was a chaotic, impossible catalog of my future literary failures. My breath caught in my throat. This was a prank, a glitch. Some hacker had messed with the library system, generated a random list that it had to be, but the specificity was chilling. The page numbers that I knew with a cold, sinking certainty, that I had abandoned Infinite Jest, on page 543 that I remembered the exact footnote where I'd thrown in the towel. I crumpled the slip in my fist, my knuckles white that a shiver, completely separate from the chill in the air, ran down my spine that I looked around the parking lot that it was empty that a single car drove by on Prospect Street, its headlights cutting through the gloom that I was alone that I shoved the crumpled paper into my jacket pocket and hurried back to my car. The image of Chloe's smiling face momentarily erased by a cold, creeping dread. The next day at work I couldn't focus. The spreadsheet in front of me was a blur of numbers. All I could see was that list printed behind my eyelids that I'd smoothed it out on my kitchen counter last night, reading it over and over under the harsh fluorescent light that it was still there, a physical thing that it felt heavy in my pocket like a lead weight. "You okay, Mark? You've been staring at that same screen for 10 minutes. Chloe was leaning against the fabric wall of my cubicle, a concerned smile on her face. She was wearing a soft, cream-colored sweater that made her skin look warm. The neckline was loose, and when she leaned forward, I could see the smooth, pale slope of her collarbones that I had a sudden vivid image of pressing my lips right there, in that delicate hollow. I blinked, forcing a smile. Yeah, just tired that didn't sleep well. "Tell me about it," she said, rolling her eyes. Her eyes were incredible. My upstairs neighbors decided to rearrange their entire apartment at 2 a.m. Sounded like they were bowling with furniture. She laughed that wonderful barking laugh, and for a second the dread receded. She was so alive, so present that it made the absurdity of the library slip feel distant, silly. "Listen," I said, the words coming out in a rush before I could lose my nerve. "I was thinking of grabbing a beer after work at the Schweinhaus. Maybe you'd want to come?" Her smile widened. "Yeah, I'd like that, sure. Meet you in the lobby at 5? "Perfect," I said, my heart hammering now for a completely different reason. She gave me a little wave and disappeared back to her cubicle. I watched the way her hips swayed in her black trousers, a confident, easy rhythm. The rest of the afternoon dragged, but now it was filled with a nervous, electric anticipation. The library slip was forgotten, buried under a wave of giddy possibility. We walked a few blocks to the Schweinhaus, the air crisp and cool. Our shoulders brushed occasionally, and each time a jolt went through me. The restaurant was loud and warm, smelling of beer and fried food. That we found a high-top table near a window overlooking Bay Street. That we talked. Really talked. Not the stilted, office-appropriate small talk we usually exchanged. She told me about growing up in Spokane, her dream of being a graphic designer, her collection of vintage postcards. That I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone in Bellingham. About my failed job, my loneliness, my fear that I was just treading water in my life. "I get that," she said, her eyes soft. She took a sip of her Hefeweizen, leaving a faint lipstick mark on the glass. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just playing a part. Office Chloe? The real me is somewhere else, you know?" I knew exactly that I was captivated. That I watched the way her throat moved as she swallowed, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the delicate shell of which I had an overwhelming urge to trace with my finger. The sexual tension was a palpable thing, a third presence at our table. That I imagined what it would be like to kiss her, to feel the weight of her body against mine, to get her out of that soft sweater. That it was as I was paying the bill, feeling buoyant and hopeful, that I saw him. That he was sitting alone at the bar, a tall glass of what looked like water in front of him. That he wasn't looking at the TV screen showing sports, or at his phone. That he was looking directly at me. That he was an unremarkable man, maybe in his late 40s, with thinning brown hair and a gaunt, tired face. That he wore a plain, dark jacket. There was nothing outwardly threatening about him, but his gaze was fixed. Intent. That it was the absolute stillness of him that was unnerving. I looked away, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. When I glanced back a moment later, he was still looking, not smiling, not frowning, just observing. "You ready?" Chloe asked, sliding off her stool. She stretched, and the hem of her sweater rode up, exposing a sliver of smooth tan skin above her waistband. The sight of it, that intimate glimpse, sent a fresh wave of desire through me, momentarily overshadowing the unease. "Yeah, let's go," I said, putting a hand on the small of her back to guide her out. It was a bold move, and I felt her back muscles tense for a second before relaxing into my touch. It felt good. Right as we stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cold air hitting our faces, I couldn't resist looking back through the window. The man at the bar was gone. His stool was empty, the glass of water still sitting there, condensation beading on the side. I pushed the thought away. Coincidence? A weird guy having a weird night. Nothing more. We walked back toward the office parking lot, our steps slower now. The mood had shifted from the boisterous noise of the bar to something quieter, more intimate. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows on the wet pavement. "I had a really good time, Mark," Chloe said, her voice soft. "Me too," I said, my voice a little husky. We had reached her car, an old, reliable-looking Honda Civic. She turned to face me, leaning back against the driver's side door. Her face was tilted up to mine, her lips slightly parted. The invitation was clear. I leaned in and kissed her. It was tentative at first, then deeper. She tasted of beer and mint from her gum. Her hands came up to rest on my chest, and I could feel the warmth of her palms through my shirt. I slid my hands down to her hips, pulling her closer, feeling the firm, real shape of her through her clothes. My mind was a whirl of sensation. The softness of her lips, the scent of her shampoo, the press of her breasts against my chest. It was everything I'd imagined. When we broke apart, we were both breathing a little heavily. She smiled, a slow, private smile. "We should do this again, soon." "Definitely," I said, my heart soaring. She got in her car and drove off with a little wave. I stood there in the empty parking lot, the taste of her still on my lips, feeling like I'd just won the lottery. I fumbled for my keys, a goofy grin on my face. Yes, I did. My fingers brushed against the crumpled paper in my pocket. The library slip. The grin faded. The cold dread, which had been held at bay for a few glorious hours, came rushing back. I pulled it out, smoothing it under the dim glow of a security light. The list was still there. The titles I hadn't recognized yesterday seemed to pulse on the page. Asterisk, The Luminous Depths. A Calculus of Shadows. Star. I got into my car and drove home, the high from my night with Chloe now tainted, the aftertaste not just of her kiss, but of a deep, inexplicable fear. The man at the bar's vacant stare superimposed itself over the memory of Chloe's warm eyes. The two images, desire and dread, were starting to braid together in a way that made me feel sick. The next week was a strange dichotomy. By day, and most evenings, I was in a budding, thrilling relationship with Chloe. We went to movies, cooked dinner at my apartment, spent a lazy Sunday morning in my bed, the weak Washington sun filtering through the blinds, painting stripes of gold across her naked back. I learned the landscape of her body with my hands and my mouth, the sensitive spot on her neck that made her gasp, the way her back arched when she came, the surprising strength in her calves when they wrapped around my waist. It was passionate, easy, and better than anything I dared to hope for, but the library slip was a splinter in my mind, festering. I started checking out books from the library, not to read but to test it. I went to the same automated return kiosk, my heart pounding each time I'd return a book I'd genuinely finished. A thriller, a book on local hiking trails, and the receipt would be normal. Just that one title. I started checking out books from the list. I found The Luminous Depths in the sci-fi section. It was a thick, purple-jacketed novel about deep-sea explorers discovering a lost city. I checked it out, took it home and tried to read it. The prose was clunky, the characters cardboard. I forced myself through 50 pages, my eyes glazing over. It was a chore. I gave up. I drove back to the library, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I slid the book into the metal mouth. The kiosk processed it. The slip printed. I snatched it. Asterisk, The Luminous Depths by S. Corbin, abandoned at page 51. Asterisk, my blood ran cold. It wasn't a prediction anymore. It was a record of a failure that had just happened. The machine wasn't forecasting my future. It was cataloging my nature. My inherent inability to see things through. And that's when I saw him again. The man from the bar. He was standing across Prospect Street, near the entrance to the YMCA. Just standing there, hands in the pockets of his dark jacket, watching me, the same unnerving stillness, the same direct gaze that a city bus rumbled past, obscuring him from view. When it was gone, he was still there, that he hadn't moved an inch. Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in my throat that I crumpled the new slip with the old one in my pocket, got in my car and sped away, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, that he didn't follow, that he just stood there, a still, dark sentinel, until I turned a corner and he was gone. That night I was a wreck. Chloe came over, bringing Thai food that I'd tried to clean the apartment, but my mind was elsewhere. "You're quiet tonight," she said, scooping pad thai onto 2 plates. She was wearing one of my old t-shirts and a pair of her tight jeans, and the casual intimacy of it, which should have been comforting, felt like a reproach. Her feet were bare, her toenails painted a dark, shimmery blue, that I stared at them, at the delicate bones of her ankles, and felt a confusing mix of lust and a desperate need to push her away, to keep this, whatever it was, from touching her. "Just work stuff," I lied, forcing a smile. "Big project." She came over and sat on the arm of my chair, running her fingers through my hair. Her touch was electric, but it also made my skin crawl, that I felt like I was contaminated. "Well, stop thinking about it for a while," she murmured, leaning down to kiss me. Her hair fell around my face, smelling of coconut and sunshine. I kissed her back, trying to lose myself in the physicality of it, that I pulled her onto my lap, my hands sliding under the soft cotton of my own t-shirt, finding the warm, smooth skin of her back, that I kissed her neck, her jaw, her mouth, trying to drown out the noise in my head with the taste and feel of her. She moaned softly, her hips grinding against mine, and for a few minutes it worked. The world narrowed to the weight of her, the sound of her breathing, the feel of her nipple hardening under my palm. But afterwards, as we lay tangled together on the couch in the dim light, the silence felt heavy, oppressive. The list was in my jacket pocket, hanging on a hook by the door, that I could feel its presence like a